the hour that builds a man. There is a version of you that exists only as a possibility right now. A man or woman who has already decided what they want, who already knows the price, and who has already begun paying it. That version of you is not waiting somewhere out in the future for luck to deliver it. It is being built, one ordinary day at a time, by whatever you repeatedly think, say, and do when no one is watching and nothing is forcing your hand. That is what this hour is about. Not tricks, not shortcuts, not luck dressed up in new language. It is about the plain mechanics of how ordinary people with no advantages worth mentioning have built extraordinary lives, and about the handful of habits that separate the people who arrive from the people who spend their whole lives getting ready to begin. 5 ideas. Carry each one with you. Let's start. The man who decided instead of wished. Picture a young man with no money, no connections, and no training worth listing on paper. He wants, more than anything, to work alongside a particular inventor he has never met, a man already famous, already wealthy, already surrounded by people who would give a great deal to be in his employ. The young man doesn't write a letter asking for a job. He doesn't wait for an introduction. He shows up. He takes whatever position is offered. Low pay, no title, nothing that resembles the partnership he actually wants because it puts him inside the building. And then he waits for years doing ordinary work well while quietly holding one settled conviction that he will eventually be this man's business partner. Not, I hope to. Not, wouldn't it be nice? He has simply decided, and decided people behave differently than hopeful people. 5 years pass. Nothing dramatic happens. Then the inventor unveils a new machine that his own sales team doesn't believe in. Nobody wants to push it. The young man volunteers. He sells it. Not well, remarkably. He is handed the contract to distribute it nationally, and the partnership he decided on years earlier finally exists on paper. Everyone who hears this story afterward calls it a lucky break. It wasn't luck. It was 5 years of a decision that never wavered, positioned in exactly the right place to meet its moment when the moment arrived. The lesson here is not believe in yourself. It's narrower and more useful than that. There is a difference, a real, structural difference, between wanting something and deciding on it. Wanting is soft. It bends around inconvenience. It negotiates with a tired Tuesday night and usually loses. A decision doesn't negotiate. It has already settled the question, so there's nothing left to argue about when the discouraging day arrives. Most people never make this shift. They spend years wanting a different life the way a person might want better weather, as a passive preference, not a commitment. And because nothing was ever decided, nothing was ever built. Tonight's practice. Pick one thing you have been wanting for a long time and turn it, in writing, into something you have decided. Not, I'd like to get out of debt. Right? I am becoming debt-free by date, and here is how. The sentence should leave no room for negotiation with your future self. Why the last hour of the day matters more than the other 15. Here is something worth understanding about your own mind. The analytical, skeptical, doubting part of you, the part that talks you out of things, is not equally alert all day. It is sharpest when you're rested and occupied. It grows quiet as you get tired. And it is at its weakest in the last few minutes before sleep. This matters because whatever occupies your attention in that weakened, half-guarded state tends to settle in more deeply than the same thought would during a busy afternoon. Psychologists who study pre-sleep cognition and pre-sleep rehearsal have long noted that the content of your final waking thoughts shows up disproportionately in what your mind processes overnight, in mood the next day, in what you remember, in what you're primed to notice. Most people don't choose what goes into that hour. They let it fill itself with whatever is loudest. The argument from earlier, the bill that's due, 40 minutes of scrolling chosen for no better reason than that it asks nothing of them. And then they wonder why they wake up already tired, already behind, already bracing for a bad day before it's started. There's a simple, almost embarrassingly obvious alternative. Decide in advance what the last hour belongs to. Not at 11 p.m. when you're tired and any plan is negotiable. Decide in the morning while you're sharp what tonight's last hour is for, and then honor that decision the way you'd honor an appointment with someone you respect. This doesn't mean lying awake working. It means giving your mind one clear, deliberately chosen picture to hold onto as you drift off, instead of a pile of the day's leftover irritations. Read your goal. Picture the version of the work finished. Name one thing you're grateful for and mean it. Whatever you choose it. Don't let the hour choose itself. Tonight's practice. Decide right now in daylight what you will do in your last 15 minutes before sleep tonight. Write it down in one sentence so tired you doesn't get to renegotiate it later. The difference between a wish and an order. There was a preacher in Chicago who had wanted, for years, to build a new kind of school, one where young people would learn a trade alongside their books. He knew exactly what he wanted to build. He had turned the idea over in his head for so long that he could describe it in detail to anyone who asked. And for years, nothing happened because a detailed idea and a decided plan are not the same thing. One evening, he stopped waiting for the idea to arrive on its own and instead did something almost absurdly direct. He announced that the following Sunday, he would preach a sermon titled, "What I Would Do If I Had $1 Million." He wrote it that week. He delivered it with everything he had. And a man in the back of the room stood up, walked the length of the aisle, and told him to come by his office the next morning. He'd have his $1 million. What changed between the years of wanting and the week of getting? Nothing about the world. Everything about the specificity of the ask. A vague wish for support for my idea is something the world can politely ignore forever because it doesn't know what to do with it. A specific, dated, public commitment is something the world has to respond to one way or another. This is the difference between a wish and an order, and it applies just as much to your own mind as it does to other people. Your brain is remarkably good at organizing effort towards specific, well-defined targets, and remarkably bad at organizing effort toward fog. I want to be successful gives it nothing to work with. I want to save $6,000 by December 1st by cutting these 3 expenses and picking up this one extra project gives it something it can actually act on. It can start noticing relevant opportunities, flagging relevant risks, nudging your daily decisions in that direction, largely without your conscious effort. 4 things any real goal needs in writing: the exact target, a number, a condition, a finish line you'd recognize the moment you crossed it. The exact date, an undated goal, is just a preference wearing a costume. What you're offering in exchange. Value doesn't move in one direction. Know what you're prepared to give before you ask what you'll receive. The first concrete step and a decision to take it, regardless of whether you feel ready. Most people who fail at goal setting don't fail because they lacked willpower. They failed because they never actually set a goal. They set a mood. I want to get healthier is a mood. I am walking 30 minutes every weekday morning, starting Monday, and I'll know I've succeeded when I've done it for 90 days straight, is a goal. Tonight's practice. Write your goal using all 4 elements above. Read it out loud once tonight and once tomorrow morning. Not as a performance. Say it like you mean it, because vague reading produces vague results just as surely as vague goals do. Naming what you're actually afraid of. There was a capable man with a genuinely good idea. He carried it around for 11 months without telling anyone who mattered, not because he lacked the opportunity to speak up, but because he could hear in advance the specific tone of laughter he imagined someone giving him. He rehearsed the humiliation so thoroughly that it became more real to him than the idea itself. In the 12th month, someone else had the same idea, built it, and did well with it. He read about it in the paper and understood, all at once, that he hadn't lost to a better idea. He'd lost to a sound he made up in his own head. Fear of criticism does an enormous amount of quiet damage precisely because it operates in private, where no one can talk you out of it. It's one of a handful of common fears that do most of their work at night, in the unguarded hour when your defenses are down. Fear of not having enough, fear of being judged, fear of losing what you have, fear of getting older without having built anything, fear of the unknown in general. These fears are powerful largely because most people never look directly at them. A fear that stays vague and unnamed can grow as large as it wants. There's nothing to measure it against. The moment you name a fear specifically, in plain words, it shrinks to a manageable size. I'm afraid people will think less of me if this doesn't work, is a completely different, far more survivable thing than the shapeless dread that sits behind it unnamed. This isn't about pretending fear doesn't exist or talking yourself into false confidence. It's about doing the same thing with fear that you did with your goal, making it specific enough to actually deal with. A named fear can be examined, tested against reality, and often found to be far less catastrophic than it felt in the dark. An unnamed fear just sits there, running the show from the shadows. Tonight's practice: write down, in one honest sentence, the specific thing you're afraid of regarding the goal you set in part 3. Then write one sentence of what you'd actually do if that fear came true. Most fears, examined this directly, turn out to be survivable, which takes most of their power away. What compound effort actually looks like. There's a story, often told, about 2 prospectors in the Colorado gold country. The first staked a claim, found a promising vein, drilled for months, and then watched the vein disappear. He drilled a while longer, found nothing, concluded he'd been wrong about the whole thing, and sold his equipment to a junk dealer for a few $100s. The junk dealer, before doing anything with the equipment, brought in a mining engineer to take a look. The engineer's calculations suggested the vein hadn't vanished. It had simply shifted along a fault line, and it could likely be found again just a few feet from where the drilling had stopped. He was right. The junk dealer made a fortune from ore that was sitting 3 feet from where the first man gave up. The real point of this story isn't "don't give up," which is a little too easy to say and not especially useful on its own. The real point is what happened to the first man afterward. He went into an entirely different business, selling insurance. And he built the habit of never treating a single no as final, because he had learned expensively what it costs to stop just short of the result. He became genuinely excellent at his new work, not despite the failure, but because of what he specifically extracted from it. That's the actual mechanism worth understanding. A setback doesn't automatically make you better. Most setbacks, left alone, just hurt and then fade, teaching nothing. The benefit only shows up if you deliberately go looking for what the setback is actually telling you, what assumption was wrong, what you do differently, what skill it's pushing you to build. That's active work, not something that happens to you passively while you wait for time to heal it. There's also a slower, quieter form of persistence worth naming honestly: the compounding of ordinary, boring, repeated effort. Most real progress doesn't look like a dramatic turnaround. It looks like showing up on the unremarkable Tuesday when nothing about the day makes you feel like it matters. Because those unremarkable Tuesdays, repeated for months, are actually where almost all of the real work gets done. The exciting decision to start is cheap. The unglamorous discipline to continue on the days it doesn't feel exciting is the actual asset. Tonight's practice: identify one setback from the last year that you never actually extracted a lesson from. You just felt bad about it and moved on. Write one sentence. What did it actually teach you specifically that changes what you'll do differently going forward? The 30-day test. None of this works as a single dramatic evening. It works, if it works at all, the way anything durable is built, through repetition long enough that it stops requiring willpower and starts being simply what you do. So, here is the honest, unglamorous request underneath all 5 parts. Try this for 30 consecutive nights, not 30 nights when you feel like it. 30 nights, including the ones where you're exhausted, where nothing that day went well, where the whole exercise feels a little silly. Especially those nights, actually, because those are the nights that determine whether this becomes a real habit or just something you tried once. Each night, in whatever order works for you, read your written goal aloud, meaning it. Spend a few minutes picturing the specific, finished version of what you're working toward. If a fear came up today, name it in one sentence instead of letting it sit there vague and oversized. Note honestly whether you did anything today that moved the goal forward, and if not, decide the one thing you'll do tomorrow. That's the whole practice. It isn't complicated, and it was never meant to be. The people who get real results from something like this aren't the ones who found a cleverer version of it. They're the ones who simply did the ordinary version consistently, on the nights it was inconvenient as much as the nights it wasn't. You already spend that last hour of the day on something. The only real question is whether you're going to keep handing it to whatever's loudest and easiest, or whether you're going to decide deliberately what you want it to build. 30 nights. Start tonight.